Hi, I'm Eric Wargo, and I am going to talk to you today about dream premonitions and survivor's guilt. There was a screech of brakes, followed by a terrible crunch of metal on metal and shattered glass. Steve bolted up in bed, his heart racing. It was a little after midnight. Somebody outside needed help. Steve lived near a busy intersection in downtown Seattle. He ran out his front door into the street and looked around. Nothing. There were no smashed cars. There was no evidence of any accident at all. All was quiet. I was dumbfounded, he wrote to me in an email. It didn't feel like a dream. It was much more specific. Still, I put myself back in bed and told myself it was probably a dream, however unique it felt. Steve went to work the next day and forgot about his strange awakening in the middle of the night. He came home that evening, went through his usual routine, and went to sleep about 11 p.m. An hour or two later, it happened again. He was jolted awake by the same violent screech of brakes, the same impact of metal on metal. It was like a bizarre replay of the previous night. I distinctly remember being confused, he said. Is this last night? Why is this repeating? What's going on? Then Steve heard someone outside on the street shouting, "Oh my God, somebody get help." At this point, he was rocked by a wave of adrenaline. All at once, I realized this was in fact a different night than the previous one, he said. This time the accident was real. He ran outside and saw that a car had been broadsided by another vehicle going through the intersection. It had rolled several times and landed in his neighbor's yard. He learned later that a young man in the car had died. Steve told me he was profoundly affected by the incident, brooding on it the whole week afterward. His thoughts included a feeling that I could have prevented it, but didn't. This is a very common train of thought in those who discover belatedly that they have had a premonition of death or disaster. All Steve could do was write a letter to the city about the poor visibility of the signs approaching his intersection to make it safer. That was a meaningful act that may well have saved future lives, but it still couldn't bring back a young life that had been cut short in the crash. Intimations, visions, and dreams about tragedy were among the first psychical experiences studied in the 1880s by the newly founded Society for Psychical Research in England. Its co-founder, philologist Frederick Myers, theorized that extreme trauma rippled through a subliminal psychic ether from mind to mind. It was Myers who first coined the term telepathy to describe the way thoughts could be transmitted between people, especially between friends and loved ones, when one individual was in crisis. Since people sometimes had visions or dreams of these crises before they actually occurred, it seemed that telepathy could also somehow transcend the linear flow of time as we usually experience it. Later in the 1930s, the Rhines and other researchers in the newly scientized field of parapsychology observed similar temporal displacement in experiments that had been designed to study telepathy or clairvoyance. Consequently, the rubric of precognition was added as the third member of the triumvirate of phenomena or abilities known as extrasensory perception, or ESP. Precognition is defined as seeing, knowing, or presponding to a future event or experience, and encompasses several vernacular terms, including premonition, what Steve arguably experienced, as well as prophecy and presentiment. The latter, unconsciously presponding to future experiences, has a large body of recent research supporting it. Most famously, the growing body of studies showing physiological responses to imminent stimuli, and studies of behavioral presponding, such as the Feeling the Future research of Cornell psychologist Daryl Bem. I prophesy that we'll see further evidence of this later today. The assumption that ESP reflects a kind of perception outside the five senses has governed much theorizing in the field since the Rhines day and has implicitly shaped much research into these phenomena. True to the implication of that word, we readily imagine that precognition, along with telepathy and clairvoyance or remote viewing, reflects some kind of information acquisition from objective events out in the world. I think a strong case can be made, however, that whatever telepathy and remote viewing may be, precognition is something different, and it is not perception. It is, as its name implies, a kind of cognition, and it doesn't reflect any connection to future objective events at all, or connection to other minds, as Myers thought, but is instead connection to the individual's future thoughts and feelings about situations they will directly experience or events that they will learn about conventionally. for instance, in the news. Elsewhere, I have outlined a framework for understanding how this likely works, both in dreams and waking life. To briefly summarize the argument, precognition is a mostly unconscious behavioral orientation to unpredictable future rewards and upheavals. It is likely made possible by the nervous system's responsiveness to its future states. The vast mnemonic capabilities of the mammalian and especially human brain amplify this responsiveness, almost like a big dish antenna pointed at the organism's own future. Converging lines of evidence point to a likely mechanistic explanation for this responsiveness to our future experiences.